This is the showdown a year in the making, but that's mostly because it took AMD a year to refresh the 6000 series lineup. In this video, we're talking about the two mid-tier 6750 XT versus the original 6700 XT. Now, you're probably thinking with the $100 markup, the 6750 better wipe the floor and become the ultimate winner versus the 6700 XT. Well, it's not that simple, and there were some interesting results, so let's get into it. What's up, guys? My name is Juan. You're watching my channel, Blueprint PC. Without giving any spoilers, I'm going to start right off the bat and say both these cards trade blows in the benchmarks. But that's not the interesting part. It's most likely why it's happening. I have for you today the two entry-level versions of these two tiers of cards from Asrock, the Challenger Pro RX 6750 XT versus the Challenger D 6700 XT. Now, on paper, they're very much alike. I'll put the specs on the screen here. There's slight advantage to this guy. The physical difference, well, it's a triple fan again, which you would consider an advantage to the RX 6750. Now, my question though, is that even really enough? And you're gonna understand why after you see the benchmarks, why I'm asking that in the first place. Now, before you skip ahead and watch the benchmarks, you may actually want to stick around afterwards because there's a key component of your system that will greatly affect how well these perform. And it seems kind of obvious, but I think in this case, it actually kind of makes a dramatic difference to some extent. So in the description below, I'll have my explanation of why I run the test bench the way I do and what the specs are, etc. So go ahead, check that out. Let's jump into the benchmarks and we'll talk about it when we get back. All right, guys, now that you've seen the benchmarks on these, you probably noticed that these guys pretty well mirrored each other in a lot of the lower demanding or more esports style titles. This only really took the lead in like the really high demanding, like grunty, fidelity rich games. Realistically, from what I've researched and seen so far, it's a pretty easy answer. It's all about cooling efficiency and temperatures. To some extent, that's kind of a duh because this is overclocked from the die itself or the processor, and it has faster memory. So that's going to create more heat. And my theory is that this specific card, at least, is creating so much excess heat that it can't maintain those clocks consistently, and it tends to downclock itself other than those brute forced areas where it has the extra horsepower to just grunt through. Where this guy, like I mentioned in the benchmark video, runs so damn cool and efficient, mind you, moderate noise, but runs so damn cool, it can keep up with this. It can maintain more consistent, higher clocks, keep that better average speed up, and then compete with this on those, you know, lesser, slightly demanding games. You know, like if you look at like R6 or something like that, they're freaking, this guy actually out-ticked it a little bit, which kind of threw me. And I think that's strictly because this was dumping so many frames and it was just getting so hot. It actually had to start pulling back its clocks to just, you know, keep itself from getting too warm. Without going too deep into that, long story short, like I said, comes down to temperature. I think these cards run a little too warm, and these cards are great because they run nice and cool. Now, there is a solution to that, obviously. Buy one with more than a dual slot cooler on it, and you should be able to hopefully unleash a little bit more of that horsepower on a more consistent basis. Now, when that comes down to a buying decision, essentially, my theory here is one, buy the one for the lowest price with the biggest cooler. That's where your more, you know, enjoyable, overall consistent performance playing experience is gonna lie. Get the one with the biggest cooler. This guy with a big chungus cooler on it is going to perform as hopefully as well as it did here today, if not a little bit better, and be even closer to this. And this potentially with a larger coolant on will perform at least a fair amount better than this. Not like what you see here today where they're kind of twinning at the moment. Now, when it comes to, again, the purchasing side of it, I still like this card. I'm still impressed with it because if you saw my 4K video, if not, watch it. But it does so well, and it's such an impressive card for what it is. I don't think it's worth the extra $100 over this guy. I really don't. I think for me personally, based on the limited use case scenario, I think $75 is kind of the high end of my red line. $50 is where I'd like to stay below in order to buy this over this. Now, mind you, these are averaging around $450 right now since the recent kind of graphics card price drops that have been occurring. And these are still sitting around like $550. So that kind of makes it a really hard choice. If you can score one of these with a nice beefy cooler on it for $550, that might be a viable option. But again, if you can spend $500 or less on this guy with a beefy cooler, I still think this is probably the better bang for the buck buy. Now, I mentioned earlier, there's potentially one aspect of your current, you know, PC that is going to play a big factor in this. And if you already have a built PC and you're looking to either upgrade your graphics card or finally buy a graphics card after all the shortages, here's the thing you got to take into consideration, which again seems like a duh moment, is how's the airflow on your case? How's the thermal efficiency of your case? If you have a hot box, you're going to have some challenges with this guy. If you have a hot box, this guy should still perform pretty well, even with like this basic 2-slot cooler, because the Focus G I tested these in, it's not a really high airflow case, and it runs certain things rather warm. So that's where I think it's a nice, good average test bench in that aspect. So this will still perform fairly well, even in a hotbox case. This, you're probably gonna lose so much performance, it's gonna perform like this. Now, if you have a high airflow case, either of these is a viable option. The thing to consider with that, the 6700 non-50 XT is going to perform very well. It's going to live a cool, comfortable life, and may actually, again, depending on the cooler style you go with, might even tick up a little bit in performance. With the high airflow case, this guy should run kind of as expected, as you saw in the benchmark videos that I did for it. And if you have a chungus cooler on it with a high airflow case, you might unleash probably another 5, maybe 10% performance in the right game. I'm going to say 5%, like 2 to 3 to 5% is probably what you realistically see with a beefier cooler, but maybe even 10% in the right scenario. So simple answer, buy the one for the best price with the best cooler you can afford. And that's my suggestion. But again, ultimately that buying decision is up to you. It's your money, not mine. So buy what you want. Buy NVIDIA. I don't care. I have NVIDIA stuff too. Outside of that, guys, check out these other videos here if they, might seem remotely interesting to you. Outside of that, please hit that like, subscribe button, and I'll catch you in the next one.